This is the VOA Special English Economics Report. American Treasury Secretary Tim Geithner recently urged China to let the exchange value of its money rise. Mr. Geithner was among top officials from both countries who gathered in Beijing for the U.S.-China Strategic Dialogue. Their goal was to increase cooperation on security and economic issues. Secretary of State Hillary Clinton spoke as the meeting opened on May 3rd. She said the two sides were working to build a relationship so that both countries grow without unhealthy competition or conflict. She noted that nations must deal with issues of economics and international politics in a way that is not win or lose, or what she called zero-sum. Secretary Clinton also said that both the United States and China have to meet responsibilities to their own citizens and the international community. The value of China's money, the yuan, was among the economic issues discussed at the meeting. In early May, the exchange rate was over 6 yuan to the American dollar. The United States says China intervenes in foreign currency markets to keep the exchange value of the yuan low. A lower value means Chinese exports are less costly than their competitors. Critics also say China unfairly supports its industries with many other forms of government support. Last year, America's trade deficit with China reached a record $295 billion. At the talks with American officials, Chinese Vice Premier Wang Qishan defended his country's money policy. He said China is moving at a measured rate to make its currency more flexible. And he urged the United States not to politicize economic issues. Mr. Wang also called on the United States to ease controls on high technology exports and increase Chinese access to financial markets. Secretary Geithner said China had moved toward a better way of valuing the yuan, but he said more reform was needed. He said a strong, more market-determined yuan will help strengthen China's economic reform goal of moving toward higher value-added production. Currency reform, said Mr. Geithner, also was important to China's financial system and to increasing consumer demand at home. For VOA Special English, I'm Alex Villarreal. You can find more news about economics at voaspecialenglish.com.
This is the VOA Special English Economics Report. Last week, we told you about a recent talk in Washington on trade ties between the United States and China. Former Secretary of the Treasury Henry Paulson spoke with former National Security Advisor Steve Hadley. The two men talked about the recent slowdown in the Chinese economy and the need for more personal spending in China. They also discussed the need for China to reform its state-owned companies. These companies often operate with low-interest loans and a lot of help from the government. In July, President Obama said China was creating an unfair playing field in its car industry. That same month, the Obama administration requested talks or consultations at the World Trade Organization. The United States says China has unfairly placed more than $3 billion in taxes on imports of American-made cars. Officials say increasing the price of imports helps Chinese car makers. Mr. Polson said Chinese government aid for state-owned companies, like oil companies and car makers, will end up hurting China's economy. Mr. Polson said this: "The only way that the Chinese are going to be able to successfully make the transition that they're going to need to make to an economy that's much more efficient is by continuing to reform the state-owned enterprises." He said these state-owned companies need to compete fairly without all the subsidies and the special benefits. Chinese exports to the United States remain strong. Demand for Chinese goods rose more than 11% in June. And China says total trade so far this year is nearly $2 trillion. That is up 8%. China's strong imports have helped the country raise millions out of poverty. These gains were noted at human rights talks in July between the United States and China. But American officials say political reforms in China have been slow. The head of the American delegation, Assistant Secretary of State Michael Posner, noted China's economic gains. But he said political reforms in the country have not kept up with its economic changes. He said the human rights situation in China continues to get worse. Mr. Posner said, "Like people everywhere, Chinese people want to be treated with dignity. This means they seek economic opportunity and jobs. At the same time, they seek a lawful way to voice legitimate grievances and have a meaningful role in the political development of their own society." And that's the VOA Special English Economics Report. I'm Carolyn Presutti. This is the VOA Special English Economics Report. The job market is more competitive than ever for millions of workers around the world. In America, one reason for that right now is high unemployment after the worst recession since the 1930s. But other reasons involve changes in the needs of the American and global economies. In big developing economies like India and China, high turnover rates mean workers often move from job to job. These days, many job seekers go online to connect with employers. Job candidates want to show they have a lot to offer, but in many cases, they simply apply for a job title and list their work experience. Instead, they should describe the talents and abilities they could bring to an organization. That's the advice of Steve Langard, Director of Professional Opportunities at DePaul University in Indiana. He advises students on career planning and often talks about workplace issues in the media. He says social media sites are valuable when they show the abilities of job candidates and not just their job title and experience. He says, this really is a talent economy, and we're stuck with most job seekers presenting themselves in a job title mode. And I don't think it matches very well. Steve Langard also says employers should think harder about the skills they really need to help their organization reach its goals. Because at the end of the day, it's still about getting the right people in the right place at the right time and then keeping them. Ben Kirchner is the founder and chief executive of a media marketing company in New York called Elite SEM. SEM is search engine marketing. His company's job is to help businesses improve their websites and search engine results. Ben Kirchner says when his company is searching for candidates for new positions, it first looks within. It considers existing employees. After that, he says social sites can be valuable. 25% of new hires come from social media. 75% typically come from word of mouth. In other words, recommendations from other people. Elite SEM uses sites like Facebook, Twitter, and LinkedIn to learn about job candidates. LinkedIn is a networking site for professionals, so users might be more careful about what they say. But Mr. Kirchner says a site like Facebook can also provide a lot of information, good and bad, about a person. So pay attention to what you put on the internet and what others put online about you. For VOA Special English, I'm Carolyn Presutti. From VOA Learning English, this is Economics. Venezuela is facing a number of economic problems. Inflation is putting pressure on many businesses. Ratson Villaban owns a gift store, but his business needs American dollars to import products made in China. He is unable to exchange Venezuelan money for dollars at the official exchange rate of about 6.5 bolivares to the dollar. He says the supply of dollars is even limited on the black market, where dollars cost much more. He says that is why business at his store is down. Venezuela has the highest rate of inflation in South America. In February, Venezuela reduced the value of its currency by 1/3, which has made imports more costly. The economic troubles have resulted in shortages of products, from necessities like food to beauty products. Venezuela is a major oil exporter. The nation's oil wealth paid for many social programs during the 14-year rule of former President Hugo Chavez. But Venezuela's recent presidential election showed there are divisions in the country. Nicolás Maduro was declared the winner of a close election over opposition candidate Enrique Capriles on April 14th. Mr. Capriles disputed the vote and called for a recount. Enrique Capriles is a lawyer. He promised to open the economy to foreign investment. Nicolás Maduro is a former union leader. He served as vice president to Mr. Chavez before the president died of cancer last month. Mr. Maduro promised to continue the social policies and programs of Mr. Chavez. For supporters, the election was about saving programs for free housing, health care, and education. For VOA Learning English, I'm Carolyn Presutti.
This is the VOA Special English Economics Report. In August, Verizon and Google proposed a plan they say could keep the internet open while supporting investment in high-speed internet service. Verizon has the nation's biggest wireless network, while Google is the biggest internet search engine. The proposal was a surprise because the two companies have been on opposite sides of the debate over net neutrality. That is the idea that all content on the web should be treated equally. Internet service providers want to be able to charge more for heavy internet traffic or users who want special services. The Federal Communications Commission regulates telephone, cable, and satellite communications. But its power to regulate internet service has been questioned in the courts. The new proposal calls for rules barring service providers from preventing users from sending and receiving legal information of any kind. Users also could not be prevented from linking any application, service, or device they choose to the web. And broadband internet providers would be barred from discriminating against content and would have to be open about their policies. Supporters of net neutrality criticized the proposal for not including wireless providers. Wireless broadband is among the fastest growing parts of the internet. Others oppose the creation of a two-tiered system on the internet in which some content gets a fast lane and other content goes slowly. But Daniel Brenner says such a system already exists. Daniel Brenner is a partner at the law firm Hogan Lovells in Washington. He says service providers want to be able to charge more because they build networks out to their customers across the country. Such companies are the so-called last-mile providers. But the internet is really a network of networks, which exchange traffic all the time and compete with each other. And not all networks reach the last mile to a customer's door. Paul Karopas of Global Crossing says his company wants to make sure agreements between service providers are honored on all networks. That way, a service promised by Global Crossing on its fiber optic network will be extended all the way to a customer's door, even if another company carries the service that last mile. The Verizon-Google proposal offers suggestions for a debate that is not likely to end soon. Daniel Brenner says the FCC needs clearer guidelines from Congress. And that's the VOA Special English Economics Report. From VOA Learning English, this is the Economics Report in Special English. 18 months of conflict in Syria have hurt the country's economy, but parts of the capital, Damascus, feel normal. Prices are higher, but goods are still available. A VOA reporter recently visited Damascus under the guidance of a Syrian government official. She told us that the spice market of Old Damascus is an unusual sight in a country affected by civil war. It is active. People are shopping there. This takes place while Syrian military forces strike nearby towns where rebels have support. One man she met operates a business once owned by his father and grandfather. He sells cumin, dried peppers, pine nuts, and almonds. He told VOA that business is about the same, but prices have gone up. This has affected both his customers and profit. He is thankful, though, that supplies are still arriving at his shop. But he says people are cutting back and mainly buying essential goods. A spokesperson with the Syrian Ministry of Economy and Trade says Western restrictions on Syria have caused problems. International sanctions came following the government's violent reaction to its opponents. But, he says, the government has worked to keep business in the capital thriving. He notes that there is a self-sufficiency to the Syrian economy and that it is very diverse. Syria is, however, seeking help from outside the country. Russia, China, and Venezuela are major trading partners. The spokesman says many of these countries stay focused on business interests and not political matters. But conditions in Syria are important to many other countries. Many thousands of people have been killed in violence across Syria. For VOA Learning English, I'm Alex Villarreal. This is the VOA Special English Economics Report. On January 18th, Wikipedia, the online encyclopedia, blacked out its English language website for 24 hours. The move was part of an organized protest against a proposed United States law to fight illegal copying of intellectual property on the internet. Jay Walsh is head of communications for the Wikimedia Foundation, which operates Wikipedia. He says the legislation is detrimental to the free and open web. It's detrimental to Wikipedia, and we want to make sure that we send a message. The blogging site Boing Boing and social news website Reddit also went black. Eric Martin, the general manager of Reddit, said, "This is a really big deal, and this is something we're going to fight, and this is something we think threatens the entire tech sector." Both Wikipedia and Reddit urged users to contact their congressional representative. Internet search leader Google also protested, although it continued to provide service. The protest was against two bills, the Stop Online Piracy Act, or SOPA, and the Protect Intellectual Property Act, or PIPA. PIPA is the Senate version. SOPA is the version in the House of Representatives. Supporters say the law is needed to fight foreign websites that sell pirated copies of American movies and music. Stephen Tepp is a lawyer with the U.S. Chamber of Commerce. He says piracy of books, music, movies, and other forms of intellectual property hurt the economy. These rogue sites are hurting American jobs, stealing American jobs, they're harming American consumers, and they have no business being on the internet. But many online businesses, including blogs, news sites, and search engines, say the law would force them to become censors. David Smith is with the Potomac Institute for Policy Studies. He says the proposed law would hurt Wikipedia and other sites that depend on material from users of the sites. He says websites would be required to police all the material they carry. It creates a legal situation in which a complainant can go before a judge and get an order, and it then makes the various internet companies, the internet service providers, responsible for what they're carrying. After the online protests, some lawmakers said they now had doubts about the legislation. The bills appeared unlikely to pass without changes. The Obama administration said it opposes any law that reduces freedom of expression or increases cybersecurity risk. For VOA Special English, I'm Alex Villarreal. The United States says China intervenes in foreign currency markets to keep the exchange value of the yuan low. A lower value means Chinese exports are less costly than their competitors. Critics also say China unfairly supports its industries with many other forms of government support and economic issues. Secretary of State Hillary Clinton spoke as the meeting opened on May 3rd. She said the two sides were working to build a relationship so that both countries grow without unhealthy competition or conflict. She noted that nations must deal with issues of economics and international politics in a way that is not win or lose, or what she called zero sum. Secretary Clinton also said that both the United States and China have to meet responsibilities to their own citizens and the international community. The value of China's money, the yuan, was among the economic issues discussed at the meeting. In early May, the exchange rate was over 6 yuan to the American. This is the VOA Special English Economics Report. American Treasury Secretary Tim Geithner recently urged China to let the exchange value of its money rise. Mr. Geithner was among top officials from both countries who gathered in Beijing for the U.S.-China Strategic Dialogue. Their goal was to increase cooperation on security, and last year, America's trade deficit with China reached a record $295 billion. At the talks with American officials, Chinese Vice Premier Wang Qishan defended his country's money policy. He said China is moving at a measured rate to make its currency more flexible. And he urged the United States not to politicize economics.